choosing a successor to Lula. 135 million voters have their say on who will take over from one of Brazil's most popular presidents. Well, so far it looks like President Lula's hand-picked successor is in the lead to replace him. Hello, I'm Taimur Nabili in Doha.
And I'm Shakun Talasantharan in Kuala Lumpur with news from the Asia Pacific. Two ancient civilizations facing a modern economic crisis. China's leader takes messages of financial support to Greece.
Well, also on this program, the US has just issued a travel alert for citizens heading to Europe. More on that in a moment. Plus, voting in a divided land. Bosnia's troubled past looms large over this general election. We're live in Sarajevo.
And I'm Nazanin Mashiri in the Republic of Srpska, where Serb nationalism is dominating the election.
And mass abduction in Acapulco. 20 tourists are kidnapped in one of Mexico's most famous resorts. Now, if they had their way, Brazilians would probably elect President Lula all over again. But he's had his two terms, and now the 130 million people who are eligible to vote must decide which way to take the country. Now, his most likely successor at the moment is thought to be Dilma Rousseff. She is Lula's pick, and she carries 51% of the country's vote, according to the latest opinion poll. But it may not be enough. If she doesn't win 50% of the votes required at the first time of asking, she'll have to face one of her two rivals in a runoff. Those rivals are Jose Serra and Marina Silva. The most recent polls do suggest that she has 51% support, just marginally ahead of the 50% that she needs to avoid a second-round vote. Her main opponent, Jose Serra, is lagging far behind. He's got about 30% of the vote so far. And the polls say just 17% of voters are backing the third candidate, Marina de Silva, meaning that she is unlikely to contest any potential runoff. Let's go live to Brazil. Our correspondent, Teresa Bo, is in Salvador de Bahia in northern Brazil with all the latest. Teresa.
Well, Salvador was Brazil's first capital, and it was here where the Portuguese brought around 3 million slaves from Africa. About 1.5 million died on the way, on the trip. But people here are saying that even 100 years later, they're still discriminated against, even though there are some very famous Brazilian football players and black musicians. They still remain among the poorest in the country, and they rarely make it to any positions in power.
The fight for equality. That's why Edvaldo Brito is running for the Senate. He's from the state of Bahia, Brazil's third largest city, where 80% of the population are of African descent. In spite of its demographics, Bahia has never had a black senator or a black governor, something that Brito would like to see change.
So much humiliation is not acceptable. The situation of black people has not changed over the years. I used to eat once a day, I washed dishes, my mother was a maid. My duty is to help people get where I am without so much suffering.
Around half of Brazil's population are black. That's around 96 million people. But there are still few Afro-Brazilians in positions of power. The majority live in conditions of extreme poverty.
Brazil was the last country in the world to abolish slavery, and when it happened in 1888, there was no contention planned by the state to help former slaves. So many were forced to live in abandoned and remote areas called quilombos. Over 100 years later, people are telling us that they're forced to do the same.
Adriana Sosa has been living in this quilombo for 4 years. They had nowhere else to live, so they took over this land formerly used as an improvised cemetery.
We don't have our basic necessities here. We're forgotten. Facts speak for themselves. Look at us. The truth is that most blacks are poor.
Under outgoing President Lula da Silva, things have improved slightly for the black population. Programs to address poverty have been launched, and some land has been given to Quilombo residents. But that's a long way from the equality that people here have been dreaming about for decades. João Jorge Santos wanted to run for the Green Party but says they wouldn't support him. He believes because of his color. He hopes that one day Brazil will have its own Nelson Mandela.
Então, na realidade, foi uma discriminação institucional.
There is institutional discrimination. It's racism that nobody talks about. The policies of the last years are too few to compensate for the suffering of the Africans.
For now, the inequality will remain, but many here vow that they will continue to fight for the place in society they deserve.
Teresa, the accusation of institutional discrimination sounds like a serious one. Is it actually being addressed? Is it an issue in this election?
Well, it definitely is, and that is something that worries many of the candidates that have been trying to participate in Brazilian politics for years. The big problem here is basically, in a way, organization, that most black Brazilians have failed to rally behind one candidate. One problem, for example, is that there is one candidate that right now she's coming in third. Her name is Marina Silva, and she considers herself black, but people here, for example, say that they won't for her because she's not black enough, and that's been a repetitive problem. But the other problem is also access to healthcare, education, and that's why it is so difficult for people to actually make it to places in government, because they basically do not know why.
Teresa Bow, live in Brazil. Thank you for talking to us. And with the voting well underway in Brazil, we will obviously be bringing you constant updates on what's going on. Extensive coverage from across the country. Teresa Bow will join us again from Salvador. We also have Lucia Newman, who's in Brazil's biggest city, Sao Paulo. Gabriel Elizondo is in the capital, Brasília. And of course, you can follow all of it online at our website.